Advancement of non-racialism and democracy. While many of us have gathered in person at the Second Avenue Business School today, we also have people joining us online on our Keynote virtual platforms such as YouTube and Facebook. I would like to welcome them as well. Please feel free to engage through the live stream and drop a comment or question via the comment box. There's a lot of excitement and great anticipation for tonight's lecture, understandably so. The Secretary General of the Mandela University's SRC shared these words with us this morning, and I quote him: "Our first attempt at political literature was that of Steve Biko. His ideas were not difficult to fathom, even for a curious 16-year-old. It was easy to read and understand because it spoke directly about blackness and the emphasis on how we should be black first in a post-colonial society. Before we can go on any further about being a just society for all, we ought to bring back life and dignity to the black man and woman." That is our SRC Secretary General, Olwetu Kawuka. My name is Vuyondo Dan, and I work at the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy. My job here is simple: is to facilitate. Tonight's program promises to be another riveting discussion, and our lineup seems to be quite exciting as well, with poetry items from Mandlovu and Band and Donga Dala Bemdiliza. A keynote address will be delivered by our advocate Ngcukaitobi, and a response by our ambassador Mbulelo Rakwena. Without any further ado, I would just like to call up on our acting Vice Chancellor, Mr. Lutando Jack, to please do the welcoming remarks for us. Give him a round of applause, please.
Thank you so much, Vuyo, Program Director. We're starting a bit late, so I hope that I can save some time. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My task this evening is to just do one thing only: to welcome all of you to this public lecture, which is part of our institutional public lecture series as Mandela University. Program Director, we are gathered in this a public lecture this evening to immortalize, to reconnect, to critically reflect on the ideals, imaginations, and the heritage of Stephen Bantu Biko, a son of the soil who was evidently ahead of his time. Biko, if he was not taken away from us 47 years ago, this year he would be 78 years old. Even though he was taken away from us by the through a brutal murder by the apartheid security forces, his legacy lives on, which is why we are gathered here in today. And ironically, his brutal killing also served as a watershed moment in the prosecution of our liberation struggle, the struggle for the liberation of the black majority in our country. His killing served as a turning point in the liberation struggle of the black majority. And yet, the fundamental struggle for epistemic freedom, for cognitive justice, for the decolonization of the mind, which serves as a critical path in the fundamental total liberation of Africans, has not yet been accomplished. A struggle that was inspired by Biko, Fanon, Ngcukaitobi, and others. Ladies and gentlemen, as we meet in this lecture, as part of our continual process of drawing on his ideals, and as part of our continual process of our self and collective rehumanization, reclamation, and as part of the process of reclaiming our humanity as Africans, we are humbled, as the program director has mentioned, to host this lecture in partnership with the Azanian People's Organization, with the Biko family, as Nelson Mandela University. A partnership that has grown stronger in the past 14 years. To this end, please join me in welcoming Mr. Biko, the son of Stephen Biko, as well as the family members of the Biko family to this lecture. We always appreciate your joining us in this occasion, Mr. Biko. We are equally grateful that we are also joined by the leadership collective of the Azanian People's Organization, AZAPO, which really needs no introduction in terms of its contribution in the liberation struggle in this country. And the leadership collective of AZAPO is led by its president, Comrade Nelvis Gqeberha. Welcome, President, as well as the entire leadership and membership of AZAPO. Please also receive our warmest welcome, all of you, ladies and gentlemen, who have joined us this evening in this lecture. I know that there are guests that come from different organizations, including the Nelson Mandela Museum in Umtata, the Daily Dispatch, as well as other partners and guests of CANRAD, our Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy. We are also joined by our real acting Vice Chancellor, Professor Kiet, our Deputy Vice Chancellor, our Registrar, our Executive Directors, as well as other members of senior management at our university. We are also joined by the SRC, president, as well as the SRC as well as his collective. We also welcome them, to this lecture. We are overjoyed by the continued show of interest by our students, to this lecture, as well as to Biko, just in terms of with a view to emulating his legacy, his teachings. I must also just acknowledge the organizers of this lecture, as led by Professor Mngomezulu. We appreciate the work that you have done, the effort you put, in organizing this lecture. Well done, Prof. Mngomezulu and your team. As the program director indicated, our guest lecturer, our distinguished speaker this evening is Advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi. I'm not going to mention Elagama about us. Is Advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi, who will momentarily be introduced by our DVC Learning and Teaching. Needless to say, he is a legal scholar, an author, a legal luminary, a social critic, and a patriot. And recently, all of us, I'm sure, know that he proudly represented us in The Hague, wherein South Africa was arguing a case in favor of the oppressed people of Palestine, in the case between the oppressed people of Palestine and the oppressive apartheid Israel. And Advocate Ngcukaitobi will not be alone as a speaker. We've got one sole respondent who will be responding to his lecture, Advocate Mbulelo Rakwena. Welcome, Advocate, to our university, and thank you for having agreed to be a respondent. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to say everything that I had wanted to say as part of my welcoming remarks, except to say, as Mandela University, we are proud to be associated in this way with this name, Stephen Bantu Biko. Not just for its sake, but for purposes of contributing towards institutionalizing his ideas, emulating his teachings, so that his vision, his imagination, his ideal society, his thoughts do not disappear in our public consciousness, as well as in our social imaginary. Biko was an African intellectual par excellence. He was fascinated by ideas. He was curious, generative, engaging. And as such, him and his contemporaries were referred to as autonomous shoppers in the marketplace of ideas. So we therefore hope that today we'll be another marketplace of ideas. And we're looking forward to the lecture which will be delivered by Ujola Baugazi, Advocate Ngcukaitobi. And we hope that the lecture will then be followed by a robust critical engagement amongst all of us, so that as we walk out of this place this evening, we are better people than when we came here. With those few words, ladies and gentlemen, you are all welcome to this 14th annual Steve Biko Memorial Lecture. Khululani ibhatyi zenu kusekhaya apha. Siyabulela. Inkosi.
Thank you very much to the Acting Vice Chancellor. Khululani ibhatyi zenu kusekhaya apha. Immortalizing Biko and ensuring that ideas never fade away from society. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being patient with us. The next item on our program is a poem, or a performance rather, by Sis Mandlovu and band. Over to you, Sis Fam. Thank you very much.
Uttered in 1977 by a man who died 47 years ago today, a leader of Black consciousness movement, a movement that frightened and scared the government of white supremacists. This is a movement that influenced and crept open fear to the youth of 1976. 1976, where Black natives and masses were tied and buried, stand guns, automatic rifles, hand machine companies have taken strategic position in action of separation, separating blacks blood from breath, blacks bodies from health, and ripping them in pieces. Peace was a luxury fantasy, because then reality revolved around the revolution of rocks, reconstructed by revolutionary songs, sticks and stones, broken tears, blacks blood and breath. Some children were running, some were jumping, some were hard flat, fast beating heart. Was part of an architect of Black hope to prove that nothing about. Nathi singabantu, Bantu Biko, Savers from Black Subordination Act, and HD Verbut, my foot 1953 implemented system.
Yes, ma'am.
Changes which are to come can only come as a result of a program worked out by black people. And for black people to be able to work out this program, they have to defeat one element which works against them. And this is an element of a psychological feeling of inferiority. 2. Which leads to my second question. What is Black Consciousness Movement? With your hands raised up, what is Black Consciousness Movement? Before you respond, I need you to understand, this movement was not a podium, nor a mic stand to stand for a microsecond and moments to appear radical. Nor was it a mask. It was not a mask to show that you are politically driven. Changes which are to come can only come as a result of a program worked out by black people. And for black people to be able to work out this program, they need to defeat one element which works against them, which is a psychological feeling of inferiority. 3. Looking through the lenses of Bantu Biko. This is a movement that blacks liberates, which enhances self-worth. Uba uthi siqapsekile, uba uthi sikhulekile, uba uthi bayasazi, cela uzingifane bakubhatala mali nemsebenzini. Bantu Biko. Thank you. Bayete. Ithabathe lungelo ndisibulisela igama lami kuNobesuthu. Ngumandlovu isiduko. Ndihamba no-sister wam apha uAnga. We're just going to do one item and then sisuke. Xa ndisiqhwabele izandla nje for isibindi. Sabelo, sesizofika ekhaya Hambaza sabelo sesizofika ekhaya. Hambaza sabelo, hambaza sabelo, hambaza sabelo, hambaza sabelo. Namai suku namai, suku namai. At your own time, at your own pace. At your own time, at your own pace. Who's got to begin away? Who's got to begin away?
There's a lot to nibble on, so we truly appreciate it. Thank you so much. The next person that I would like to call up on the podium is a representative of the Biko family. May I please call upon Mr. Biko to provide and give us a message of support from the Biko family. Give him a round of applause, please, as he makes his way to the stage. Assistance, please.
Thank you, Program Director. Mandikale Tikapele, Acting Vice Chancellor. Siyabulela ngokubulela indlu yakho wena neqiza elimele lomzi. Dibulise uPresident weAZAPO neqiza lakhe uComrade Hashe nabanye abakhoyo. Dibulise our honored guest and speaker uAdvocate Ngcukaitobi. Into kamaXhosa xa ethanda ayayideketise. So ke simbiza Ngcuka ke thina. Dibulise wonke umuntu walapha. Dibulise noMandlovu. It's very appropriate that we are led by you. every leader has a leader of their own. Paekaya, the leader, Steve Biko, is a lady called Mandlovu. Umamunziki Biko. Besawulala phandle ke uba ube lapha. Xa ibona wena. So I will have to extend an invitation to you to come and visit us at the Steve Biko Center. Ukusinqamlise andihambi ndedwa ke. I am together with members of my family here. Sikhokhelwa ngusisi wam uNomagqwetha apha phambi kwam. Awuphakamise noba sisaphakama in fact bakubona. This beautiful lady is the daughter of my father's only surviving sibling, uSisi Luna. Bobonke abanye basweleka. Sisi Luna uzala yena ke ungaphambi kwam. So in English you'd say she's my cousin, but we are African, she's my sister. Uhamba ke nonyana wakhe nonkosikazi wakhe and my sister uBuli yabalapha. So we are representing the family here. Other members of the family are representing us elsewhere, and we are delighted to be here. As we gather here, I also would like to recognize that elsewhere in the country, various spaces are remembering and honoring Steve Biko. At the Steve Biko Garden of Remembrance this morning, Umamu Biko led a delegation there. She was hosting the Grahamstown Anglican Church diocese. Ebikhokelwa ngu-Reverend Venyana. Usually the family has an intimate service at the graveyard. The Anglican Church has included Steve Biko on their lectionary. And on the Sunday closest to the 12th, all Anglican churches recognize him as a martyr of hope, which is a very progressive decision by the Anglican Church. And so those services, some of them happened last weekend, others will happen in the coming weekend, and today was one of them at the graveyard. In Durban, at the Durban University of Technology, UMTAPO and that institution are also having a different event led by Professor Bani Pityana, who was with us here last year. At Constitution Hill earlier this morning, Professor Seth Cooper, who also has been here to attend this lecture, is giving another lecture there organized by the 70s group, which is a group of elders who are colleagues of Steve Biko. TEFLOP is celebrating their 65th anniversary this year, and today Advocate Mujangu Gumbi is leading a reflection on the state of the country through the lenses of black consciousness. There are institutions around, such as the Steve Biko Center for Bioethics, that also organizes a different event. The Steve Biko Academic Hospital on the 25th of this month will be having their own event. The Steve Biko Cultural Institute in Brazil, Bahia, as well as the Steve Biko Housing Association in Liverpool, also doing their events. There are many others that I don't have on this list, including individuals who make it a habit to educate the younger generation. People like Velimbele, people like Sabelo Hlanganisa, and many, many, many others who turn their own social pages to become educational platforms during this period. We are extremely grateful for all of these efforts. Someone asked me how I feel about these activities, and I made a comparison. If you recall, we have buried many leaders in this country, but there is one that stands out in terms of how we mourned her, and her name was Winnie Mandela. On that occasion, every young woman and old woman wore a doek, if you remember. in celebration of the life of Winnie Mandela. And so, in a different way, the nation tips their hat to Steve Biko as a sign that his legacy lives in their heart, and it is something that we take for granted. We will round off these activities on October 19 with the Foundation's 22nd Steve Biko Memorial Lecture. We will make those announcements at a different time. But tonight we gather here at this institution. It's a special place for me and for the Biko family. I was born in this city. My mother moved here to be with her brother, Dr. Mashalaba, when the time had come for me to come. And so ndazalelwa apha ke. It is also this city that took away my father's life. Now, I have been reading of late in the newspapers that the state of the city is concerning. And it's important that we rescue it and we return safety to our communities. Asinawuphathwa ngabantwana. And we are a nation of activists, and we should rise to defend the spaces that we created, the free spaces that we created through our democracy. Ndiyafuna kuyibulela university, ndibulele noYaZapho. YaZapho is probably the organization that has traveled the longest journey on preserving the legacy of Steve Biko. And it is why, it is for that reason that we are here to celebrate as part of this lecture. I was delighted to learn that Ngcuka is going to give this lecture. I saw him earlier in the week elsewhere at the Dumanokwe lecture, where he was introducing Advocate Tikgang Museneke. When my mother learned uba Ngcuka uzayinika le lecture, ufune ulahla into ngaze ngokwakhe apha. I don't know what this young man whispered to my mother. I think he whispered sweet somethings to her because I suspect there is something of a crush. He crashed especially that when she last saw her husband, it occurred to me that the speaker exemplifies the values of Steve Biko. And I just want to start elsewhere. There's a chapter in I Write What I Like. It's simply titled On Death. Steve Biko writes under that topic, On Death. And once I was interviewed by a scholar from the US who said to me, there's a debate among scholars that he didn't write this chapter. I said, well, you know, scholars are allowed to dream what they want to dream. But I can assure you he wrote this chapter. He wrote this chapter at a time when they were reckoning with the seriousness and the implications of activism. And they were having debates about what happens when you are being tortured. Right? And in it, he says, listen, you guys, if you want to do this your way, you're going to handcuff me. You will have to handcuff me, right? So that I do not respond. If you allow me to respond, I will respond. And I'm afraid you may have to kill me in the process, even if that was not your intention, right? And the most powerful line, he says, you are either proud and alive, or you are dead. So in the word of Steve Biko, there is only one way of being alive. It is to be proud. It is to have your sense of self. It is to own your soul. Yeah. And he wrote this based on an incident where he had been tortured, or at least they had attempted to torture him. A fellow in King Williamstown who was a bully called Hatang tried to sneak in a clap during interrogation. Waibambe yoqala. And he said to him, Hatang, umdala, don't talk to me in this manner. Otherwise I'm going to have to respond. Hatang didn't listen. And Kamela, when he was fed up, was in the habit of saying, do you want a left or a right? We suspect that he gave him a right. Hatang is sprawled. He loses a couple of teeth. His colleagues don't move. And that was the end of them ever handling Steve Biko in that manner. And so when the ones in Port Elizabeth arrested him, they had heard of this story. And they wanted to get even with him, to prove themselves. And we know how this killing machinery here was, led by Obonivaut and them. You are either alive and proud, or you are dead. Somewhere else, someone whose vision and values are echoed by Steve Biko, Frantz Fanon, says, every time a man has made the dignity of the spirit triumph, every time a man has said no to an attempt to enslave his fellow man, I have felt and then some people have the gall to introduce me as the son of somebody who has never had gray hair. I have felt in sympathy with his act, in solidarity with his act. Uchoku Frantz Fanon elsewhere. I'm using these 2 points of emphasis to segue to why it is that it's so special that this lecture is given by Ngcuka. Earlier this year, as we were told, he was part of a team that represented us very, very well at the ICJ. And the foundation has dedicated its platforms this year to accentuating the cause of the people of Palestine. And that team that did a sterling job in reminding the world that the universal rules of humanity are inviolable without exception. That team included Christopher John Robert Dugat, Tembeka Ngcukaitobi SC Senior Counsel. UKC ngubani King's Counsel, I guess, in the English context. So Blin ni Gqeberha igama lakhe KC, Max Duplessis SC, Vaughan Low KC, Sidiso Ramukhale, Sarah Jones, and Lirato Zigalala. That team did a sterling job taking the occasion of our 30th anniversary and giving us a present by affirming the humanity of those that suffered like us. And it is for this reason that the Fanon Foundation, the Steve Biko Foundation, the Pan-African Psychology Union, and the Psychology Association of South Africa, which is led by Seth Cooper, joined hands, and on the 8th will be awarding that entire team the Biko Fanon Award in Psychological Liberation. So, Azapo would not have known, and the university would not have known in inviting Ngcuka. But it is the most appropriate moment for him to give this lecture. A man who, like Biko, owns his soul. He occupies fully his office. He has an amazing command of the law. He has an amazing way to take very complex legal concepts and tell a beautiful story. And he's a man that makes us proud, and the most suitable speaker to give the 14th Steve Biko Memorial Lecture organized by Azapo. We are delighted, uMandlovu ute dibulise, and wish all of our proceedings well. Thank you very much.
Sibambe ngazo zozibini kwikhaya lakwaBiko, sibambe ngazo zozibini nakuye bhuti Nkosinathi. So we've reached that point right now, ladies and gentlemen. But before I call upon our DVC, Dr. Muki, I would like to call upon Andy Mood. Adala bemdiliza. Uye ke lo, yiza ngokini.
Ndizidibanise ndizinyusele bhekile ninye ngoba bona bakhe bathi bayazala kanti benza umnikelo bazala umuntu sabubona ubuntu yanganathi singanabo negama yangubantu bantu bonke Biko ndinikeni izilawu zale mizi ndizidibanise ndizinyusele bhekile ninye ndinikeni izilawu zale mizi esamatete nesamagcina ndizidibanise ndizinyusele bhekile ninye ngoba bona bakhe bathi bayazala kanti benza umnikelo bazala umuntu sabubona ubuntu kwanganathi singanabo negama ngubantu bonke Biko. Mahambe Petisali Chopo echapaka nokwindla Stuli setafa Duna ndini kumaduna Kata umzingaye Sana lukamamu nokzola Zanga zole kwa dina matambo kanyoko Mshazana izinja Zamadlampasha zigjaja telisa Kumhlaba wasemakhanda yasikinimba wagodola tashinkweni kumlambo waseGqeberha ezibhoja zebhengethe zihlubule zokombatha zisiba ziyabulala kanti zihlwayela gqebe zinkcenkceshela zihlwayela oko bekusele kutshaliwe awusayi kufa Hluma sitshalondini samagcina Hluma uhlume emthindini wangqambu zinabeleza fikelela naphashiya kolwandle mahambe Petisali khalakhulu yakratra kubancikifi ndikhoza wena moya kaBiko mahambe Petisali khalakhulu uyakratra kubancikifi ndoda ndini eyahlakula kumhlaba waselibode yahlakula yabuya nentshatyambo yasemandlovini yayizeka mfondini yayizeka yayenza umfazi siyabulela ke kolodunakazi siyabulela ke kulomazi yasemandlovini sithi phila naphakade nawe nozala abantu Biko sigodlo ndini sokukhwaza ukuzinga sigodlo ndini sokukhwaza ukuzinga ngebala yanganathi ngomoya wakho singamanyana yanganathi ngomoya wakho singamanyana thole ndini elincanca koncenceza kombambo zinomongo siyabulela kuba bazali Ndinikeni izilawuza lemizi esamaqete nesamagcina ndizidibanise ndizinyusele ebhekile ninye ngoba bona ngenye imini bakhe bathi bayazala kanti benza umnikelo bazala umuntu sabubona ubuntu negama yangubantu bantu bonke Biko bantu bonke Biko Yesu esami isono sam felwa nguYesu ayisuka ndiyaxoka nguBiko Yesu esami isono sam felwa nguYesu ayisuka ndiyaxoka nguBiko hayi emnqamlezweni amgaya enqoleni amahla selemxusha ingqondo sezimkile utabusala amanzi bam mbopha bamkhonxa bemxhimfa wafunyana esizwe Yesu esami isono sam felwa nguYesu ayisuka ndiyaxoka nguBiko hayi emnqamlezweni amgaya enqoleni amahla selemxusha ingqondo selezimkile utabusala amanzi bopha yasopha bamkhonxa bemxhimfa wafunyana esizwe suduka msamariyakazi eli ayililwa iqula likaba omkhulu yakobo ngoboka malinga hloli igazi torho injongo yalo mbongo ayikuko ukubuyisela embo yibhekile yesilawu gibe nabantu bekhaya silungisa ukuhlala sifuna intlusa amabandla kwintshabalalo yamasiko nezithethe zakowethu vumbululu uncede nkrune umzibeni into kamqhayi ngombongo sihloko sithi tshawe laseBritane esithi ayikodi iBritane enkulu yaza nomfundisi eXhagijoni yaziphethe iBhayibhili nebhotile yaza nenkanunu nemfakadolo tahuba wasikhetha iphina loo nto ayilwahlebo nangoku singompundwananye ezweni lokhokho bethu sondliwa ngentshela nemvuthuluka zezonga eziwe zithebeli zabamhlophe nohlokhe sakhe abarhwebelana nabo ngeli lizwe noma silingane uzena losinga nkululeko into nje yokumntwanisa isizwe siqakhe intsongo emehlweni sithini ewe bafika kweli lizwe sababona ukunyepha sababiza ngabelungu njengesizwe sinobuntu sabelana nabo kuko konke sasinako ngelinge lokuhlalisana kwakunye nabo kwathi kanti asivumisanga singaphosi inhlola nje ngokwenza inceba faka amahambe eziphokothweni sibethekisa ngenyeketyeni basirhukela udakeni besibulela ngezikhohlela bathi bengabasemzini babona ubusathana kwinkolo yakho wethu basikakaza ngomculo nomlomo bomvu besithi incwadi ephefumlelwe nguThixo batsibila itye likaphungela ngokuthuka amanyange bewabiza ngedimoni begrimfim umnene wakwaJuda njengokuphela kwakhe indlela yakwawo sezulwini uThixo sifudula simazi njengoyise wayo yonke indalo namhlanje unonyane kuphela kwakhe amzeleyo sisimanga ningathi ngqana mndinobango Yesu esami isono sam felwa nguYesu ayisuka ndiyaxoka nguBiko hayi emnqamlezweni amqhaye enqoleni amandla agusha selemxusha ingqondo selezimkile ukuyakusela amanzi bambopha yasopha bamkhonxa bemxhimfa wafunyana esizwe Yesu esami isono sam felwa nguYesu ayisuka ndiyaxoka nguBiko
Mandingawagxubhi la mazwe sanduwafumana masiphinde sibulele simqawile izandla kwakhona siyabulela dongadala bemdiliza ladies and gentlemen yeah, I think we're still on schedule. Without wasting any time, let me call upon our DVC, Dr. Mukimueng, who's going to introduce the keynote speaker for us. Give a round of applause, please.
Good afternoon, Molweni, Dumelang. I'm here, Bulisan. Thank you. I'm here to introduce Tembeka Nicholas, and I was going to say Nicholas Ngcukaitobi is a South African lawyer and legal scholar. As an advocate of the Johannesburg Bar since August 2010, he gained silk status in February 2020. He is currently a member of the Judicial Service Commission and a part-time member of the Competition Commission's Competition Tribunal. Ngcukaitobi clerked for Justice Arthur Chaskalson on the Constitutional Court of South Africa. He spent several years as an attorney for Bowman Gilfillan before joining the bar and the Constitutional Litigation Unit of the Legal Resource Center. He has since argued in front of the Constitutional Court on behalf of clients including the Economic Freedom Fighters, the Zondo Commission, and President Cyril Ramaphosa. In addition to several academic articles, Ngcukaitobi has written 2 well-received books about land, law, and land reform in South Africa. The Land is Ours, South Africa's First Black Lawyers and the Birth of Constitutionalism in 2018, is based on several years of research and focuses on historical land dispossession under colonialism and apartheid, as well as its links to a bourgeoisie constitutionalism among black lawyers. Land Matters, South Africa's Failed Reforms and the Road Ahead in 2021, which was shortlisted for the 2022 Sunday Times CNA Literary Award, sets out an argument for reforming policies on land ownership and land occupation. Ngcukaitobi has been strongly and publicly critical of the African National Congress's record in post-apartheid land reform. Ladies and gentlemen, Advocate Tembeka Nicholas Ngcukaitobi.
I think, you know what? You know, it's possible, but I don't know who's up, but Gubani Lognical Gam. Oh, Nicholas. Abezama again, I was saying, Bana, yea. We are schooling. Kubelula, because he's going to the class. Or Kabelu, Damasuk Fagas, which knows about Nicholas. Go, wake up in the late, Dobana, yea, and to play consciousness. Go. And the Zalfunel Gam. Awunasibindi sawuxelela umakhulu uba yekhe kwazana kaloku mana qhutywa ngohlobo so ke uhamba ke uembrace ke lonto inikwe phofu ke nalo muntu usingaye wanamhlanje ikwangu Steve ke naye so siqhuba ngolo hlobo ke ngosinathi ningasikhalazeli kakhulu ndiyabulela ke mandiqale ngomntakwethu impondomisela kuthi kaloku ufuna uqale ngolo uphethe nalapha kuthiwa uyi acting VC cacile ke lonto leyo ba amampondomisa size ngawe ke Dr Muweng divile ke intetho ibilapha undi-introduce kamnandi ndayithanda lonto leyo kuthiwa ke no Miss Shuba ulapha uyaqasha xa ufuna umsebenzi apho uya and then no Mr Cocker uyi-registrar xa uzawugxothwa phaa kuthe usuku sinento kuthiwa ngu-G7 xa uyafeyila phaa bayifaka entanyeni kuthiwa goduka and then ke nomnumzana uNkosinathi Biko kunye negqiza lakwabiko lilonke siyabulela ngembeko enisenzela yona into okubana nize apha nibe khona isiqo singeva kuthiwa bebefuna ukuza mana bakwazanga usisitsiki ke mna naye ke sawuthetha ecaleni ningangena indawo ke nini kodwa ke siyabulela bana nilapha and then ke nenkokheli yeAZAPO umnumzana uQekema negqiza lakhe I'm privileged that the Azanian People's Organization has invited me to deliver this lecture. You as Azapo should feel proud that you are one of the few organizations that have kept the memory and legacy of Steve Biko alive. I also feel privileged that my host tonight is this great university named after Nelson Mandela. I've entitled this lecture, A Blow to the Head. It is obviously a play on the words because that is literally what was revealed in the inquest as the cause of Biko's death. But I also use it as a double entendre. There is a secondary meaning to the title. Steve Biko's death was itself a blow to the head of black society, and maybe a blow to the head of society at large. The subtitle of the lecture is The Murder of Steve Biko. After reading a number of tributes and lectures in honor of Steve Biko, probably about 5 of them, it became clear to me that the story of the murder and the complicity for the cover-up that came afterwards is yet to be fully explored. I have therefore pieced together a narrative based on public sources, archives, and public materials to create not just a picture, but an imagination of the last 5 days of Biko's life. Because Biko was not an isolated man, there is another pressing but forgotten story which provides context and elucidation to the final days of Biko. I shall start briefly with that story. On the 15th of April 1996, Ms. Nontle Mohapi appeared before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She wanted to tell the story of the death in detention, perhaps more accurately, murder in detention, of her husband, Mapetla Mohapi. This was the first day of the commission, and Ms. Mohapi was the commission's very first witness. In a court of law, the choice of a first witness is a singular decision, as it can shape or sink the trajectory of a case. Yet, right at the outset, Bishop Desmond Tutu, who chaired the commission, announced just before Ms. Mohapi was sworn in to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth, that the commission's proceedings would not be conducted like a court of law. The reason, he stressed, was that he wanted the proceedings to be dignified and respectful to the people whose stories were to be told in that forum. In welcoming Ms. Mohapi, Bishop Tutu would continue. Many of us remember as though it was yesterday when Mapetla died in police custody. We remember the anguish and the horror of those days. We know also, apart from the personal grief that you've experienced, that you yourself have been a victim of human rights violations. Mapetla had been a graduate of the then University of the North, where he became a member of the South African Students' Organization, SASO. He was also an activist in the nascent Black Consciousness movement, where he met and forged a comradely relationship with Biko. For his activism in the Black People's Convention, Mohapi was detained in 1974 for about 8 months. A year earlier, Biko had himself been banned and restricted to the area of King Williamstown. After his arrest, Mohapi was transferred to the Central Prison in Pretoria without notice to his family, who continued to believe that he was in King Williamstown. It was Reverend Alred Stubbs who suggested that he could perhaps be detained in Pretoria, which is where Ms. Mohapi traveled to see if she could find her missing husband. While in Pretoria, for weeks, Ms. Mohapi was prevented from gaining access to her husband. One day, she was told that she could see her husband, but only for 2 minutes. That 2 minutes must have felt like a lifetime. There was no charge put to Mohapi, and then out of the blue, in April 1975, he was released. His capturers and interrogators must have concluded that there was nothing more to gain from his further detention. The police could do this in terms of the laws of the time. But they were not done with Mohapi. In September 1975, Mohapi was banned in terms of the Suppression of Communism Act 44 of 1950, also known as the Internal Security Act. In terms of the banning orders, Mohapi's movements were restricted to Zwelitsha, which was under the then King Williamstown. Now we know that place as Qonce. He used the time to finish his degree at Teflop and became a qualified social worker. Very few Africans had university qualifications, even fewer in a discipline as important as social work. In that sense, Mohapi was a torchbearer for his community. He also saw himself as such because he took up a job at the Zimele Trust Fund, a fund which cared for the reintegration into society of political prisoners upon their release from incarceration. On 16 June 1976, South Africa's future changed forever. Under the auspices of the Soweto Students' Representative Council and the radical leadership of Tsietsi Mashinini, the education bloodline of apartheid was challenged openly and defiantly. Emerging evidence now proves the centrality of the black consciousness philosophy in shaping and channeling the uprising of students against the enforcement of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in black schools. The immediate challenge, of course, was that the shift from English to Afrikaans in subjects like maths and science resulted in exponential levels of failure among black students. And Steve Biko, the foremost intellectual of this generation, could capture and articulate the phenomenon in enlightening and radicalizing ways. The problem, Biko said, was that the imposition of Afrikaans produced an inferiority complex because it inculcates in many black students a sense of inadequacy. You tend to think, he said, that it is not just a matter of language. You tend to tie it up with intelligence. So Afrikaans, therefore, didn't just become another subject to be mastered at school, but it was a political lightning rod. The uprising of June 1976 sent shockwaves across the political establishment. Since the Rivonia trial had ended in 1964 with the life imprisonments of the leaders of Africans, there had been no direct confrontation with the system, which exercised some sort of a vice grip on the lives of black people. Now the control was loosening up. The challenge was posed, and the system of white control was proving vulnerable. Since the days, literally, of Jan van Riebeeck, white power always thrived out of a sense of control over black people. From that control, it could guarantee its own security. Many children were shot in cold blood to suppress the uprising on the 16th of June 1976. Those who couldn't be killed on that day were hunted down and then their lives sniffed out of them. The aftermath of the uprising was a dangerous time in an even more dangerous place. Black consciousness was identified by the white government as the poisonous influence upon an otherwise innocent community of school children. Biko had emerged as the intelligent, astute, and articulate spokesperson of this new philosophy already in May 1976, when he was subpoenaed as a defense witness in the so-called Sasso trial, whose official designation is S versus Gqeberha and 8 others. It is in this context that Mohapi was arrested again on the 16th of July 1976, again without charge and again without trial, this time the second time. This was unlike the first 8-month detention. He didn't survive. When his body was seen again on the 5th of August 1976, he was a corpse. An inquest found no one responsible for his death. In fact, the police manufactured the falsehood that he hanged himself with his own pens while in detention. To buttress the lie, they also fabricated a suicide note. Ms. Mohapi could easily dismiss this as a clumsy forgery because the signature on the piece of paper was not that of her husband. Later judicial outcomes of the Supreme Court in a civil case launched by Ms. Mohapi also sided with the police in finding the police innocent of the death of a man who was in their custody when he died. On the 27th of August 1976, Biko was also arrested, remaining in detention for more than 100 days, no trial, no visitors. His only guests were interrogator after interrogator. Let me complete Nonhle Mohapi's story, because in the next episode of her life, it ties directly with Biko. She faced hardships. As someone who was regarded as a wife of a terrorist, she was unemployable. When Biko began what they referred to as self-help projects, she found this a useful way of using her skills to uplift her community, and she worked as Biko's secretary. Enter the Apartheid Intelligence Unit, the Secret and Secretive Bureau for State Security, BOSS. In 1976, BOSS agents actively tried to infiltrate the Black consciousness movement. Their eyes were set on Biko. At the TRC testimony, Nonhle recalled promises of bursaries to study overseas, attempts to plant tape recorders with her so that she could pass on whatever information she could gather on Biko. They wanted to know everything about Biko, she said. In the end, they got nothing. She gave them no information. But for this, she would pay. She herself was detained. Another 6 months, no bathing water, no lawyers, no family. Her company seems to have been the filthy toilet bucket, which was sometimes collected, but mostly not. The place of her detention was the Road police station, a couple of kilometers from here. But in the evenings, the members of the special branch, the detention squad, would fetch her to the Sanlam building, also a few kilometers from here. This, she recalled, was where the atrocities took place. A person beaten until they pass urine, beaten until they soil themselves. The target again was Biko. They wanted her to admit that Steve is a terrorist and that Steve is responsible for the distribution of the pamphlets. As they pressed on with the interrogation, their methods became desperate. From begging her, they changed to threats and then to violence. Ms. Mohapi would conclude her testimony as follows, and I quote, "At times, they would bring blank papers so that I could sign, and they promised to release me if I should sign them. But they asked me if I wanted the same thing to happen as happened to my husband. At times, I would be fastened to a grill, and then would be assaulted brutally, and would be unable to defend myself. There was not even a chance to run away, because the grill holds you so fast that you cannot do anything about it." In the end, she refused to sign the blank piece of paper that was given to her. But once they captured their target, Biko, the police seemed to have lost interest in Ms. Mohapi, and they just discarded her, injured, scared, and scarred, traumatized. It was up to her to pick up her pieces and to rebuild her life with toddlers and without a husband. You see, the apartheid system drew no distinction: man, woman, daughter, son, husband, wife. Once within their sights, they had to be found, and once in their clutch, anything was possible. It seemed that the means were justified by the ends. Steve Biko was murdered. After the murder, there was a cover-up. 8 policemen were involved in the murder and in covering it up. Doctors were also implicated in the cover-up, and the involvement of state lawyers and the magistracy, representing the judiciary in the cover-up, transformed the event into a grand scheme which could only be carried out by people with money, power, motivated by evil. I want to examine the events leading to the murder, not so much the motive behind it, but to try and answer the question of what happened. Many who are here today do not know the full story, and even those who know it might find it as shocking as the first time they heard it. Steve Biko was arrested on the 18th of August, 1977. This was the 5th time of his detention in Grahamstown. Until his death on the 12th of September, 1977, he was in solitary confinement, with his only visitors being his cruel and barbaric interrogators and torturers. Psychologists have long argued that isolation from human contact for long periods is a form of psychological trauma. Only recently has the United Nations adopted the Nelson Mandela rules, which describe the confinement of a person for longer than 15 days without proper human interaction as a form of torture, and thus prohibits it unless in extreme and limited circumstances. The warrant for the arrest and detention of Biko was issued in terms of the Terrorism Act 83 of 1967. That act was indeed the act of all acts, a law to end all laws. Since the 1950s, the white government had tried to pass different laws to control black political activity. But the pinnacle of all of these laws in intensity, scope, breadth, sheer cruelty and barbarism was the Terrorism Act. If a person was detained under that act, their fate was sealed. Basically, an act of terrorism came down to one factor: intent. The intent to endanger law and order in the Republic. If one committed or incited, encouraged, instigated, commended, aided, advised, encouraged, or procured others to do anything with that intent, they were guilty of the crime of terrorism. Yet it was not the process of proving the crime before a judge that was of interest to the securocrats that wielded political power at the time. Indeed, it was the process by which one came to be a detainee that was the true intention behind this law. Take, for instance, Section 6, which was the central clause in that law. An arrest could be effected without a warrant, although in Biko's case, we know there was a warrant. The police commissioner was under a duty to inform the minister at least once a month whether a detainee was still in detention or why they had to remain in detention. A detainee could, at least in theory, make representations to the minister relating to their detention or release, who in turn had the power to order the release of a detainee. Section 6, subsection 5 was a most cynical provision, ousting the power of the courts. It stated, "No court shall pronounce upon the validity of any action taken under this section or order the release of any detainee." And only government officials could visit a detainee. A magistrate was not allowed as a matter of course to visit, but only if circumstances permitted. And there was no duration to the detention, meaning that a detained person could be kept by the police indefinitely and in perpetuity. It was under this law that Biko was detained. Yet, as Advocate Sidney Kentridge noted on the 1st of December 1977, during the final hearing of the inquest into the death of Biko, a detainee, even under this law, was an awaiting trialist, not a prisoner yet, because no judgment had been passed by a judge concerning their guilt. But in reality, a detainee under the Terrorism Act had less rights than a convict. A detainee should have been entitled to food, to exercise, to go outside for fresh air, to clean clothes from his family. In violation of the conditions of the warrant, Biko was not allowed out into open air. He was not allowed to receive food. He was not allowed even to bath. He was not allowed fresh clothes from his family. In fact, a perverse and despicable thing happened. The clothes that he was wearing when he was detained were taken by the police, and he was left naked in the cell. for days. Recall that the theory of the law was that the detainee could complain to a magistrate about the conditions of their detention. Biko did just that on the 2nd of September, but he was ignored. The policemen who were responsible for Biko's entire movements while he was in detention included Daniel Sibet, Jacobus Beneke, Ruben Marx, Gideon Novoet, and Harold Sneyman, taking shifts day and night. The warrant also dictated the place of his detention, Warmer Police Station, again a few kilometers from here. That is where he was detained on the 19th of August after his arrest just outside Grahamstown. Peter Goosen was a colonel in the South African police. He had given the instruction that Biko should not be allowed any clothes and that he should be kept naked. His explanation for this order was to prevent suicide. It was left to Kentridge to ask whether, for decency's sake, it was not appropriate at least to give a man some underwear. In the morning of the 6th of September 1977, Biko was taken to the Sanlam building for interrogation. We recall that Ms. Mohapi had described this place as a place of atrocities. Biko would remain at this place until the 9th of the 8th. During that entire period, for 2 days, he was in wrist shackles and leg irons. Plainly, he was also deprived of sleep, as the shackles were fastened to a grill in an office, which was designed for the interrogation. The question of why a man would be kept in chains and tied to a grill was raised at the inquest. It too happened on the instruction of Goosen, who seemingly had limitless powers over any detainee. Of interest was whether there was any law that authorized the use of leg irons in the manner they had been used. None, said Goosen. But that was because Biko was a detainee of the security police or the special branch. For Goosen, the special branch did not operate in terms of any statutes, but in accordance with its own powers. And there was also no convincing reason for chaining a man to a grill for 2 straight days. He could have been kept in a locked cell, guards could have been placed outside, but none of these options were considered suitable. What they wanted, it seems, was to break him down. When Biko was removed from Walmer to Sanlam building, on the evidence he was fit and well. Upon his arrival at the Sanlam building, the interrogation lasted for hours, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. He was well enough to answer questions put to him, even if he was uncooperative or even aggressive, and aggressive he was. However, during the morning of the 7th of September, at 7:30 a.m. to be exact, he was found by Colonel Goosen to be incoherent. Goosen said that he suspected that he might have had a stroke in the evening of the 6th of September. A stroke. Goosen would later say why he thought about the stroke. Biko could not speak. He couldn't engage in any conversation. The interrogators had also conjured up their racist theories about Biko. One was that he was into Eastern yoga, and the other was that as a person who had studied medicine at the University of Natal up to 4th year level, he had the ability to manipulate and exaggerate. So although his physical situation was grave already by the 7th, there was no change in the course of action by the man that detained him. Perhaps unwittingly, Goosen's observation found some support in the medical evidence. At 9:30 a.m., 2 hours after Goosen had made the observation that Biko probably had suffered from a stroke, Biko was examined by the state doctor, Dr. Lang, who, with all of his biases, found signs of neurological abnormality, slurred speech, atactic type gait, and a difference in reflexes in Biko's arms, which were weaker on the right side. If by the morning of the 7th, Biko had already exhibited signs of physical and mental wreckage, these were confirmed on the 8th. On that day, 2 more doctors examined Biko. Dr. Tucker found that he moved his left upper limb with difficulty. The reflexes on the left upper limb were reduced and difficult to elicit. There was doubtful upgoing toe on the right side, and he had difficulty in using his left leg, and enuresis had occurred. These were elements consistent with a neurological disorder. Another doctor, Dr. Hirsch, also came pretty much to the same conclusions, but he took it further. There was evidence of brain damage. The extensor plantar reflex, the decline in speech, and the left side weaknesses. Klaus von Loras und Wilkau, the advocate retained by the state, protested at the language used by Cambridge during the inquest. Biko had been smashed up by the police, said Cambridge. Any cursory reading of the medical reports proves that Cambridge was correct in his description of what the evidence revealed. Biko could have survived if the story had ended on the 8th, and upon the realization that he had been badly injured. But regrettably, the story goes beyond, into an even darker and a sinister place. Biko should have been seen by a specialist physician, but on the 9th of September, he was still left in shackles, in an obviously confused state, which is consistent with brain damage. This was so much so that there was a report that he exhibited unusual and odd behavior. The attempt by the prison warders of Port Elizabeth to place him in a prison hospital was short-lived. By the 11th of September, he had been removed and placed back into a cell, sitting on a mat without any clothes on, in a dazed state, obviously in excruciating pain. Dr. Tucker was called in again, but it seems that on this occasion, his medical ethics had temporarily escaped him, as he saw nothing, heard nothing, and could speak nothing. His report was that there was nothing wrong with Biko. But there was something very wrong. This is why on that day, a decision was taken that he should be taken to hospital. But this hospital, a prison hospital, was more than 1,300 kilometers away from Port Elizabeth. It was in Pretoria. They put him in the back of a Land Rover, with no food, no clothes, no medically trained personnel along the way, and only a bottle of water for his provisions. On arrival in Pretoria, his actual condition was distorted. It seems that the police felt a need to pass on the story that he could potentially be feigning his illness. It was also said that he was on a hunger strike. No one from his family had access to him, no friend. When he died, he was in a prison cell on a stone floor. The policemen who had lied about him were also nowhere to be found. George Bezos has described Biko's last hour as sad, lonely, miserable. I would also add the word cruel to the vocabulary. As soon as the reality of his death hit home, there was panic. A narrative had to be found. A story had to be constructed. 8 policemen were involved, 5 during the day, 3 during the night. Doctors Lang and Tucker were also involved. What would they say had happened? They were the last ones to be seen with Biko, the man. The first ones to be seen with Biko, the corpse. How did this happen then? The evidence was clear. Biko died of brain injury. He must have suffered this on the 6th of September and between the 6th of September and the morning of the 7th of September. One version, concocted by the police, was that he hit his head on a wall during a scuffle with the police. Yet another was that he hit his head on the floor. And an even more fanciful one was that he lunged at the police and tried to assault them. Yet this is a man they kept in chains the entire time because they argued that he had a violent temper. The only version that is consistent with probabilities is that he was beaten with a blunt instrument on the head. Jimmy Kruger was the Minister of Justice at the time. As soon as Biko died, he was quick to appear on the television to make the perverse announcement. I quote, "I am not glad and I am not sorry about Mr. Biko. His death leaves me cold. I can say nothing to you. Any person who dies, I shall also be sorry if I die." Yet he also stated falsely that Biko had been on a hunger strike since the 5th of September. There was an inquest into the death of Biko. An inquest is mandatory when a person dies in these circumstances. It was held at the Old Synagogue in Pretoria. The choice of this venue was also political. That is where the treason trial was held in the 1950s. In over 13 days between November and December 1977, Sidney Kentridge, George Bizos, Annie Wenzel, and Shani Chetty would try to restore the credibility of the legal profession under apartheid, which had been sullied by acts of cowardice and collaboration. It was clear that Biko's death was no accident. It was not a death in detention, in fact. Biko had been murdered. When Hossein was questioned on this, he answered that he had no reason to kill Biko because, for him, quote, "Biko was worth more to me alive than dead." This was a callous thing to say. Today we can say that. But they could say it then because of the policy of the state towards people like Biko. As for Biko, we know him as having embraced a deeply philosophical approach to death, saying that the manner of one's death can also be a politicizing thing. His death clearly was. The magistrate who presided over the inquest was Martinus Prince, and he had two assessors, Professor Izzy Gordon and Professor Olivier. Izzy Gordon was an anthropologist, Olivier was a lawyer. They were clearly men of the system. While illuminating in the evidence presented and the disclosures made, the inquest failed to produce an outcome that would allow the bones of Biko to rest. This is what the magistrate ruled. Quote, "The following is my finding according to section 16, subsection 2 of the Inquest Act. 1. The identity of the deceased is Stephen Bantu Biko, a black man approximately 30 years old. 2. The date of death is the 12th of September 1977. 3. The cause or probable cause of death is head injury with accompanying extensive brain injury followed by centralization of the blood circulation disseminated intravasal in the vessels, blood clotting, as well as acute kidney failure with uremia, urine in the blood. All of them consistent with heavy assault. 4. The available evidence does not prove that the death was brought about by any act or omission involving or amounting to an offense on the part of any person." This ruling was given on the last day of the inquest, being the 2nd of December 1977. When it was announced, Ntsiki Biko, who was sitting next to George Bizos, could not contain her utter astonishment and disgust at the ruling. "What?" she said. "Is he saying that there is no one to blame?" Those words have now been immortalized in a book by George Bizos called "No One to Blame: In Pursuit of Justice in South Africa," published in 1998. In the chapter in that book entitled "The Passion of Steve Biko," there is a quote from Hilda Bainston, who describes the Biko inquest as the revelation of racism, of the way it has distorted ordinary people and the way it has destroyed all morality and decency in a rich and beautiful country. This is a potent quote. What in fact was going on? At his interrogation, the security branch theory was that Biko was wanted for authoring a subversive pamphlet which advocated black power and the killing of whites. The pamphlet was read at length at the inquest. When I read the inquest record in preparing for this lecture, I was also keen on the contents of this pamphlet, which seemingly gave the police the perfect pretext to lock Biko up as a terrorist. For the most part, the pamphlet is about black unity. Some of the statements there are compatible with what Biko could have potentially said. Of course, the police knew this because his views were public. But it was when the pamphlet transitioned from the virtues of black unity into the murder of other black people who were perceived as opponents of black power that I could tell that it was a clear fabrication. Not even a clever fabrication. The pamphlet simply did not make any sense. It was plainly a product of security branch amateurish work. But I think there was something deeper at play. The decade of the 1970s was a dangerous time for black intellectuals who questioned the system and revived the spirit of the struggle. The previous decade did not have an unhinged security branch police operating outside the rules of law and the rules of morality. The leaders of the revolution in the 1960s were all sent to prison. But in the 1970s, they were assassinated, executed to create a climate of fear. This was the legacy of the securocrats in Bos, which had come into existence in 1969. Onkgopo Tsetiro was a talented man. He was murdered. Mapetla Mohapi was a gifted man. They murdered him. Steve Biko, who had moved from medicine to law by the time of his death, most of you don't know that, stood at the pinnacle of the talented sons of this country. He too was murdered. Tenjiwe Mtinso fled into exile. Nkosazana Zuma, most of you don't know, was a member of the Black Consciousness Movement, also left the country. There were many others. What was unique is that they were the brightest and the most talented sons and daughters. But apartheid as a geography had no place for them. The men of the law were complicit in all of this. Again, we use the Terrorism Act as a template for the complicity. It contained the ouster clause. No one could go to court to challenge detention, and no court could order the release of a person detained under the Terrorism Act. For the most part, the judges embraced and enforced this law, meaning that politicians and the bureaucrats could exercise unrestrained despotic power over ordinary people's lives. The ruling by Martinez Prince in Biko's case, finding that the death was caused by unknown persons, simply confirmed the selectiveness and bias of the legal system. Snyman, Siebert, Bennett, Marx, and Nieuwoudt are obviously among the killers of Biko, or at least one of them is a killer of Biko. They applied for amnesty from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the 5th of September 1996. In its ruling, the TRC found that Biko's death resulted from a collision between an object and his head in room 619, Sanlam Center, Port Elizabeth. However, the TRC rejected the amnesty application, noting that Biko's head was, on the policeman's version, accidentally knocked in an attempt to restrain him after he had attacked Siebert. On this version, they said there was no political objective. The scuffle was not a political thing. Restraining Biko was not a political act. The police themselves had said that when they questioned Biko, they already had the information which apparently linked him to acts of subversion and terrorism. If this was the case then, said the TRC, there could be no political objective to pursue in his further interrogation. But, and here is the rub, the TRC also found that the policemen lied in their application. They had falsely accused Biko of violent temper swings. Their version was so improbable and contrary that it had to be rejected as false. They were not credible witnesses. They had conspired to conceal the truth of what led to the death of Biko. Mr. Kendridge was no longer around to cross-examine the police in 1996 when they appeared to lie before the TRC. But in George Bizos, there was an able replacement. He had exposed the policeman's version to be a pack of lies, just like it was 20 years earlier when Martinus Prince, the magistrate of the apartheid legal order, said it was the truth. The TRC concluded that it was more probable that Biko was attacked after the police did not take kindly to his arrogant, recalcitrant, and non-cooperative attitude, particularly exemplified by his occupying a chair without their permission to do so. This attack appears to be actuated by ill will or spite towards Biko. This view is reinforced by the cruel and inhumane manner in which Biko was treated after he sustained the fatal injuries, and in particular in the manner in which he was shackled to a metal grill and his transportation to Pretoria. The TRC, you see, had no way of knowing what Biko said to his interrogators, but we know what he must have said. Speaking of one of the episodes of his interrogation, Biko made it plain what his general attitude towards interrogation was. He had told one policeman, he recalled, that any rough stuff would not work with him, and that if they wanted to get information from him, the best way to do so is to talk. And he knew one method of dealing with the police. I quote, "I only understand one form of dealing with the police, and that is to be as unhelpful as possible. So I button up." And he could do this because, from his perspective, he had taught himself to overcome the fear of death. This takes me to the final point. The story of Steve Biko is also about the law. The law is a fundamentally moral thing. In Biko's case, it was perverted to serve immoral ends. This is why Steve Biko stood against the apartheid legal system. In the end, standing on immorality, the apartheid legal order could not sustain itself and was bound to collapse. The story is also about injustice. If the law is selective in its application, it loses credibility. The apartheid legal system was premised on a racial injustice, on the supremacy of whites and the subservience of blacks. No legal system can survive where it is fundamentally animated by racialized inequality. The story is also about accountability. When I say that the legal system was complicit in the murder of Steve Biko, I do not mean that in an abstract, colorless, valueless way. I mean it in the tangible, concrete sense. It was lawyers who designed a law that was so obviously discriminatory and designed to breathe life into apartheid. The Terrorism Act was a law without the rule of law. This distinction is necessary to make because often a criticism is directed, perhaps misdirected, at the law as such, producing unjust outcomes, such as apartheid. It is so that apartheid was a rule by law, but it is false to equate that as the rule of law. The former is rule by force through legislation, while the latter, which is Steve Biko's true legacy, is the supremacy of the law over people. This is what we must defend in South Africa. You see, the case of Biko powerfully illustrates the point. Because we had no supreme constitution, and in fact had parliamentary supremacy, it was easy simply to pass any law and to tell any court that it had no power to intervene, including in cases of human liberty. That is all possible in a supreme parliament, but impossible in a supreme constitution. There is a further dimension to accountability. If we are to build for the future, let it be on firm foundations, not prevarications, evasions, and lies. When the TRC decided that the 5 men who applied for amnesty would be denied, that imposed a duty on the state to prosecute the failed applicants. Are they now dead? Can they be prosecuted? If they are dead, obviously they cannot be prosecuted. But that is not where it ends. Why were they not prosecuted when they were still alive? This is also another layer of complicity by the legal system, the current legal system, to avoid doing the right thing, which is to bring perpetrators of murder to justice. It is so that our country faces many pressing challenges, including state capture, grand corruption, which all require the attention and the resources of the severely under-resourced National Prosecuting Authority. But the prosecution of people who did not get amnesty is also one of the things that must be done. The failure to prosecute them disrespects the Constitution and brings about contempt for the law. Let me draw to a close on this theme of accountability. In the book, Country of My Skull, Gqeberha vividly describes the first day of the hearings into the role of business during apartheid before the TRC on the 11th of November 1997. Biko's spirit hung in the air, haunting the presenters. There was a touch of surrealism, Gqeberha observes. The breathtaking wealthy captains of industry, Nicky Oppenheimer, Bobby Godsell, Julian Ogilvie Thompson, dressed in designer suits, sat opposite the commissioners to be questioned, just as hundreds of others have sat before them. An illusion of equality. Not even the rich were above the law. Those testimonies began on a note of denial. Then came ignorance, and finally prevarication. Johan Rupert recalls Gqeberha began by defending Afrikaner business. This is what he said. Rembrandt was started by Afrikaners and sustained by Afrikaners, long before the Afrikaner had financial clout. By the third day, on the 13th of November 1997, it had dawned upon the captains of industry that their denials of their complicity with apartheid was bad for business. But nothing came. The blow to the head that struck Biko was at Sanlam Building. Sanlam Building is named after Sanlam. Sanlam is itself an institution synonymous with apartheid. Yet Biko, even in death, wouldn't let go. Finally, Johan Rupert asked for forgiveness about Biko. This is what he said. I was fortunate enough to have met the late Steve Biko in the late 1970s when he was the head of SASO. As an Afrikaner, the immorality of his and other murders will live forever with me as a permanent reminder of the cruelty of man to man has perpetrated during the evil years of apartheid. And then he ended. I hope and I pray that our fellow citizens will forgive us. It was this theme of forgiveness without accountability, that your organization, AZAPO, took to the Constitutional Court in one of its first decisions. Then the court said we should entrust the democratic state with a space to do things right for the victims of human rights violations. But it hasn't done so. Perhaps AZAPO's skepticism at the beginning was justified. But I have to plead that let that skepticism not turn into cynicism about the project of democratization under the Constitution itself. When business spoke at the hearings, many promises were made at the TRC hearings. Many promises were made to set things right. But as Gqeberha observed, this was a show seemingly designed to look good on the 8 o'clock news. When the hearings were concluded, it was pretty much business as usual. The oil companies who were responsible for putting petrol into the apartheid military vehicles did not show up at all. Those who bothered to show up simply shelved their submission and carried on with their lives, as they had done before. That remains the case even as we gather here tonight. Today's generation confronts many formidable challenges. We do not have Biko's moral clarity, his courage and intelligence to confront them. Yet Biko is still here, still irreverent, still asking us the difficult questions of the day. Granted, our country is crisis-ridden from multiple fronts: racial inequality, crime which disproportionately affects black people, capitalism and accumulation which favors whites at the expense of blacks, its progenies of racism and starvation, apartheid tentacles which stubbornly refuse to disentangle, and deep-seated levels of poverty. Biko is still with us, still asking us, what are we going to do to continue the unfinished struggle for the emancipation of black people? It is difficult to answer these questions. There is, however, something devastating in Biko's disarming intelligence. Most of his ideas just flew out of him without effort. By far, he is one of the most quoted and quotable figures of his generation. Yet, the root of his philosophy, the root of the philosophy that he espoused, was not so much a grand and all-encompassing theory of state. It was a simpler idea of self-pride. Not a philosophy that we should think like him, but that we should think for ourselves, that the people as a whole are their own liberators. The apartheid state could not match Biko. They could not match him word for word. He was above and beyond their grasp. Biko's message is not that we should try to become heroes. He was not one. Neither did he project himself as a big man of the struggle. But he does demand that we should be better than ourselves, that we should fight for ideals and ideas that transcend us, that we should be impatient with injustice, but above all, that we should at least try to make the world a better place. One Azania, one nation.
Thank you once again to Advocate Ngcukaitobi. If we ought to build, then we ought to build on a firm foundation. Thank you very much, Gqeberha. Next up on the podium is Ambassador Mbulelo Rakwena. Ambassador Rakwena is a seasoned diplomat who served as South Africa's ambassador in several countries, including Brazil. He was appointed by former President Mandela as South Africa's first black High Commissioner to Mauritius in 1998. Amongst his many contributions, Ambassador Rakwena drew the Articles of Association for the founding of IPSA, which later became BRICS. He has lectured extensively both at Dirkle's cadet program in Latin America on aspects of international dialogue and relations such as human rights, world trade law, African diaspora dialogue, peace and security, and constitutionalism. He is a founding member of Rakwena and Associados and continues to serve in several international boards. Ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause for Ambassador Rakwena.
Program Director, that's a very generous introduction of me. For a second, I didn't think you were talking about me, but thank you nevertheless. Bendithanda izawuthetha ngesiXhosa, ndibulise ngesiXhosa, because abanye abandaziyo bazi ukuthi igama lami ngumbulelo, but they often wonder why ndingathethi isiXhosa. I now affirm why I will not speak ngesiXhosa, having had amaXhosa athetha namhlanje, including the poems that were dedicated to Biko. I mean, you could only but not help but have tears well round your eyes, for they elevated the man that we are to celebrate today. I had worried when I first read someone's writing who's a friend. I'm not sure whether to mention his name. Some of you may have read this piece, but he writes something that he titles A Prayer for Biko, 12 September 1977. He says, sometimes the deepest loneliness isn't about dying for freedom. It is about being forgotten. You watch as friends, family, and above all, comrades and towers move on. Their lives continue without you, and you are just a footnote of history. And he goes on and on. Now, these words troubled me. And thanks, Nkosinathi, when you spoke, I thought this is not entirely true. Biko is impossible to forget, because Biko is a population of ideas that are unlikely to ever die. You may have killed Biko, the physical person, but it is impossible to kill Biko, the spirit, Biko, the brain, Biko, the ideas. That's impossible. So this fellow, Sandile Mehmet, oh, I mentioned his name, I had meant not to. He must be wrong. He must be wrong. Of course, he also has a point that must not be dismissed. Even after we listen to Nkosinathi tells us about a plethora of activities that are taking place through the length and breadth of this country in celebration of Biko, the man, from Umtapo to the Anglican Church having dedicated Biko's life and recognition, to the Constitutional Hill events, to the Tefluop events, to the BCMU visitation of the grave, no, not the grave, the prison cell where Biko was murdered, to the celebration fine beyond this country, Bahia, Salvador de Bahia, where I served, where there is an organization called Steve Biko Foundation, which is one of the first that I went to see when I went over there. It can't be that Sandile is entirely correct, but he is correct in saying, are we doing enough as a Biko movement? I think that we should be able to take. Chairperson, I've started the wrong way because I've not acknowledged my hosts. It's not the first time I'm at this university. Somewhat this university has a way in which it brings me back from time to time. Even when I tell them, Imanibo. And every time I come here, they change my titles. They confer new titles to me. And I must mention this because I do not want to get away with it, although I'm excited by it. When I first came, they called me Dr. Rakwena, and I thought that sounds nice. The second time I came, they called me Professor Rakwena, and I thought there's something in this university. Maybe they are throwing in indications that I should not go further from them. But this time around, they've done it again. They ignored the fact that I'm Ambassador Rakwena. and elected to call me Advocate Rakwena. Huh? I wondered as to why that may be so, because 31 years ago, indeed, I did study Big Proc. I did not finish. Yeah? So you can't call me a lawyer. Yeah? Several years thereafter, I tried again, Advocate Ngcukaitobi. I tried again. I really did try. Went with UNISA this time and registered for LLB. I have to say I did not finish yet again. And there may be varied reasons why I'm not Advocate Rakwena, but I love the title. Huh? I don't know if I could keep it, if only for the evening anyway. But of course there's a sense in which one must reject and tell the truth. For if you don't tell the truth, there's a sense in which it catches up with you. If you embrace a Faustian moment that you may have to disavow at one point or the other, it would be, and I'm not talking about anybody, I see some smiles here. Huh? The temptation of good titles give you that Faustian moment in which you might say, I think it feels nice, I will embrace it. Yeah? Please do not do that. I only have one title, and that's Ambassador Rakwena. But let me get back to what I thought we should do. After this tapestry of a wide-ranging sense of information and celebration drawn from various chapters and first of all, you must recognize that it's difficult to respond to Ngcukaitobi. Sorry, what do you call you, Nicholas? Now, it's difficult to respond to him because his sense of depth about any subject that he touches, he spares no detail for anybody to come round. If you read the 2 books that he has written, you have to say, but if I were to oppose this, where do I start? Because he gets to be absolutely thorough about the work that he conducts. But he didn't only do that tonight. He went further to paint a man around the stories beyond Biko. He spoke about Me Mohapi. He spoke about the tribulations of others. He spoke about the weaknesses, inherent weaknesses of the TRC, a project in my view which was premised on having to foster a new political settlement and order. Whether it did fit into the reality of our times, perhaps that was not the issue. There was the urgency and the convenience to want to bring about a reconciling South Africa at whatever cost. And that's why it is no wonder that when you look at part of what he refers to, one has to wonder when the TRC itself gets, in my view, a little worse when it says that an object collided with a head. There has to be something wrong when that pronouncement is made by a people who are supposed to be taking us into a new democratic order. But the project was necessary, and therefore it may be possible to understand why some accommodation had to be made. Advocate Ngcukaitobi, and I almost said Dr. Ngcukaitobi. I think the latter is just a matter of time before it happens anyway. One of the things that he reminds us of is the stories. He tells the story of Mohapi eloquently, who sometimes is made a footnote of Mohapi himself. This version of what happened and the torture that she was subjected to is often not told. part of the marginalization, I suppose, of women in our struggle, something that we have to deal with a lot more seriously, because often there are references, appendages to their men, something that we have to deal with. But the issue around Mamu Happy for me is, and I'm hoping that the advocate will respond to some of these things, as to how does the law transform stories and convert those stories into edifices of justice. How do you take away the fact that it was not just a beating that Mamu Happy endured? That it was not just the killing of Steve Biko that the country has got to reckon with. How do you turn that into edifices of justice so that never again would we have an opportunity for these things to repeat themselves? Now, you might say to me, we have a constitution. The question to ask is that adequate? Are the protections and the guarantees adequate in the constitution, where there is an obvious alliance and coincidence at times between political power and the administration of justice? And I'm not saying that the judiciary is corrupt. No. Please, I will never make that statement. But I am saying that throughout history, there has seriously been incidences in which the judiciary has collided and cooperated and has exalted the power play that a political order and oligarchy holds at a particular point in time. How do you make sure, therefore, advocate, that we do not have the repeat of this situation? I want to return to my notes because I have 15 minutes and those I had timed. So if I lose my notes, I will end up sounding like a speaker myself. There's no way you could have two speakers on one day. So mine is limited to 15 minutes and I'm left with, is it 7 of those? But I want to round it off by the following 3 questions. Advocate, I direct those largely to you. I want to know what the blind spots that the judiciary, as a fundamental third arm of government, needs to be mindful of. In other words, to avoid and not to be complicit when justice is under threat or the rule of law is threatened, or the rule of law threatens the introduction of circumstances akin to those that murdered Biko. I want to know, and I should say the corollary to this question is whether the Marikana is a glaring weakness to the excesses of the state power, protection of its brutality, and defense of capital interest. I would wish you to cover that in your reflection about Biko, because there is a sense in which we thought no more will we see the Biko brutality. But then we know better. We saw Marikana, the Constitution notwithstanding. Question for me requires a reflection and somewhat some kind of assurance. I'm going to invite you, advocate, to look at a possibility where we make the assumption of an inadequate political will by the ruling oligarchy that we have now to prevent material conditions that evidence the murder of Steve Biko in protection of the political elite of the time. What guarantees exist and comfort what comfort can we have that the judiciary will offer to the marginalized against the state brutality in seeking to entrench its power. Can we really be sure that the state will act in protection of the ordinary people? Already a lot of people are complaining that not sufficient transformation of our legal system has taken place. And transformation is a major issue. Other incidences, and I accept, advocate, I accept that the draconian laws, most of them have been removed. But that on its own, whether there has been sufficient guarantees of transformation of the legal system, that is to give effect and protection to the interest of the majority, can we be assured that that is so? Because if that is not so, the hollowness of democracy comes to be something that we should take seriously. Democracy becomes hollow, because if it is about a franchise, the ability to vote and so forth, but there continues to be wanton acts of criminality against our people where there is no defense of our people, where 27,000 people in 2023 are murdered, and measure that, I had somebody make this, which I thought was a legitimate comparison, measure that against 37,000 people that were murdered in Gaza in the same year. How different, no, sorry, I must rephrase. I can't say how different we are to the Gaza circumstances, but what is our responsibility towards the protection of ordinary people? Because that 27,000, it's not the prominence of people that we see on the radio, on television when they are murdered, but it is the majority of those that can afford to put up high walls and security for themselves. Therefore, what are we doing so that it makes sense when we say that our responsibility towards international human rights starts here at home as well? Because it's a human rights violation when our people in that magnitude cannot be protected. Sorry, I don't want to mess up my question. I hope you had it, Advocate. Sometimes I go on for long and forget. I'm going to ask the last one. And Chairperson, I'm not sure how you wanted me to deal with this, because I see you have a question and answer session. So I'm going to limit myself. I had taken the approach that I'm not going to be the speaker, but I'll have the pleasure of, for a change, asking the speaker to respond to certain things which I think are necessary. It's a privileged position to be in, because then you are not the originator of a thought process. You simply respond to it. And in this particular case, I'm glad to be doing that, because I think we are dealing with a legal brain that has the capacity to be able to answer to those things. Oh, by the way, for what it is worth, umama wam limpondo naye. As you can see, I'm endearing myself to the speaker. The last question that I wish you to consider, President of Azapo, did I recognize you? I apologize profusely, because, you know, I'm a son of Black consciousness, and you carry the flag of Black consciousness. You might ostracize me. I know in the Catholic Church where I practiced, we would excommunicate recalcitrant, what do you call, abantaba sondai. So I don't want to be ostracized. I recognize you, say. I recognize the family, because without you carrying this torch, we would not be able to honor this man. And I recognize everybody, and since I don't want to mess protocol, those that Ngcukaitobi recognized, I recognize. The last question is this. It is possible that the silence of the lamb Silence of the Lamb. It's a metaphoric reference to the abrogation of responsibility by working class organizations such as AZAPO, community leaders and their formations, when the contestation of power disempowers the poor, tramples and dishonor their inalienable rights, such as a right to health, and their economic rights are muzzled in staggering unemployment and a deepening state of indignity. It is possible that metaphorically, the silence of the lamb becomes our state. The reason I needed to ensure that I've not missed the president was to be able to say, Mr. President, that because you are part of this organization and for which we thank you, but AZAPO perhaps should consider being louder than it is to dealing with day-to-day issues. It can't be right that AZAPO gets, and I remember tirelessly looking at that screen. At the last count, I think it was just over 20,000. It can't be right for a political organization that bears the black consciousness thought as something that is a given and should be a given amongst us, whether it is in schools or everywhere which current material conditions beg for the existence of black consciousness. Comrade President, let's do more. But more importantly, before Comrade Ngcukaitobi, sorry, can I call you Comrade? Should not forget is that, do you think that there is, of course, in what I have portrayed above, is there unintended collision between the state and the judiciary when the latter, that is the judiciary, fails to enhance and promote conditions that can increase justice? For instance, you refer to the fact that Steve Biko's case, as brought about by AZAPO, has still not found resonance with today's legal system. What then becomes the role of ensuring that justice has got legs on which it is able to walk? Otherwise, what meaningful existence of this thing that we call a new democratic order means to ordinary people? Thank you. Oh, sorry. I just one thing. I apologize. I've never done this before. But I think Steve Biko reminded us, and it would be injustice not to say this. There's a fellow that says every generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. That is Frantz Fanon. Perhaps we need to ask ourselves, what is that generation? Are we that generation? And are we betraying or fulfilling our mission? Thank you. Sorry, my pencil.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Rakwena, and we truly appreciate that insightful response to our keynote speaker. May I kindly ask that our keynote speaker and our respondent please make their way to the front while we make provisions for the Q&A. You can... All right, so I am checking online and I am not seeing any questions, but the comment that has come through says that Azapo, keep educating the nation about our heroes. Let's give a round of applause, please. Right. Now, this is the most exciting part of the evening, ladies and gentlemen. I understand that there was a bit of a delay in our start, and therefore it would be kind of an injustice for us not to have a Q&A. So I am going to be generous, right? I am going to open up a round of 5 questions, and 5 questions only, right? I can see that there are some hands coming up, but I must declare that I'm going to be biased to young people. I am going to be biased to young people. So if you look over 35, I'm sorry. So let's start on the left. Siswam, number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. And number 5 on my right, please. Can I please get assistance with the roving mic, Odwa? Number 1 is right over there. Oh, and sorry, before you speak, now could you please stand up, state your name, and state who the question is for? Thank you.
Hello. Is this one? Yes. My name is Gqeberha Mfukeng, and my question is to both the speakers, well, both the speaker and the respondent. More than anything, what we've gotten from this is the fact that we are direct descendants of apartheid. It is not far removed from who we are. In our blood is the blood and the mourning and the grief of elders who have gone through these mass atrocities. It's not very far removed from who we are. How then do we begin to reclaim who we are? And in Ambassador Rakwena's words, how do we begin to aspire to our mission when we are still recovering from the mass atrocities that we are direct descendants of? How do we begin then to seek out a mission maybe that is mirroring that of the previous generation, but which also sets the path of our own, when in any case we are under the shadow of such mass atrocities that cannot be forgotten and are so vivid in the memories of people that are present and are really vivid in our minds too, just from the details that have been explained tonight.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good evening. I'm Kanya Tsagata, and I lecture housing policy and research spatial injustice and spatial inequality. And this is to Advocate Ngcukaitobi. In your lecture that you gave at the University of Johannesburg about a month ago, you reflected about constitutionalism and its malcontents. Of course, a lot of us know about your critique about land reform in this country, but there was something that you said that is quite interesting, which I think goes over into sort of criminal law. And I wonder what, even though you have a critique about the Constitution and its failures, you are also quite optimistic. The statement that you gave at the University of Johannesburg is that the Constitution can, and perhaps once again, play its redemptive role. It can become our book of redemption. The first question is, do you truly believe that? And secondly, do you truly believe that the Constitution in its current form and the judiciary, which you play an active role in as a practitioner first and also as an acting judge, in its current form, do you think that it can truly become this redemptive book that you speak about, or that you spoke about 5 weeks ago? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3, the green shirt at the back. Green shirt at the back, number 3.
Thank you so much. I was born in, my name is Luyanda Tisani. I was born and bred here in Mandela. All right. Especially these days, Alamba Atwa. I think the speaker noted that. I don't usually travel, but I had a privilege last week of traveling to Cape Town, and on my way back, I saw Stellenbosch University. I've got photos to show. I have evidence in the language of the country. Right.
Please, man. Time, right? So can you please just try and limit the preamble and get to the question?
Okay, thank you. Last night, to cut the long story short, I passed, I was at Alice, and it was a dark, town. Now my question is, that brightness or whiteness and that blackness or darkness, who is to blame for the state of affairs that pervades in our day? As I sit, I also want to ask, I see that I think the CJ is retiring. What happens then to his to the commission that is named after him? Thank you.
Otto, number 4. Yeah.
I think here we came to listen to the memorial lecture of
Sorry, sir.
Now the speakers that have already been given, it seems as if they do not understand why the Q&A has to specifically focus on what we are here for. We're not here for.
Thank you, sir. 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 Please continue.
Bhodani ma-Afrika mahle. Igama nguZiqhamo uLyolo ndingumfundi walapha eNemyo. Umbuzo wami ndicela ubuza uAdvocate Ngcukaitobi. The question I'm going to ask is along the lines of decolonization of the law, along with continuing constitutionalism. I'd like to ask the advocate, how can we exploit the gaps within the law? For example, how can we empower Chapter 9 institutions, whereby the South African Human Rights Commission is not just a lullaby. For example, the TRC is going to also be another lullaby with the national dialogue, whereby the Human Rights Commission has jurisdiction, has binding powers, where they don't every time need to relay back to the court and back, and just the other Chapter 9 institutions. Lastly, how do we move away from this romanticized transformative constitutionalism into an effective constitution which reflects the majority of the people and the needs thereof?
And then number 5 is right there at the corner. Pa.
Long live to Biko. Igama lami ngubuhle bethu wakaqaka. Wambuzo uya Advocate Nicholas. Having learned a bit Kubiko, we know that it drew a small distinction in between the white conservative forces and the liberal ones. So, in taking from these lessons, what should be our attitude towards the recent political development in the country, where we have black political parties who have decided to go and sleep with the right-wing white forces and did what they call GNU, Grand Coalition?
Thank you. Thank you. So this is going to be the order of the speakers. I'm going to ask Advocate Ngcukaitobi to start with his response, and then we'll go over to Ambassador Rakwena. Advocate, over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, kuthiwa iyavakala. No, Jabula. you know, kukhona el comrade belisethi lecture kabiko le abantu abangazi nezabo izinto. So I think he had a point. But out of order, you know? which can nam ke andingo chairman wale nhlanganiso, so ubu out of order. Kodwa ke ndiyayiva nto nithetha. Ndiyakuva uba uthini na, because ngoku ndizawuphendula ezinye izinto ngoku. Kodwa ke ndinyanzelekile because uchairman uthi mandiziphendule. All right, just to respond to the, I mean, you know, this is not really a response. I mean, it's just reflections. We're having a conversation. Because I'm not giving like prescriptive answers. I'm just generating ideas and thoughts, you know, for things we can take outside of this room and maybe continue the conversation, because this is the power of Biko's body, you know, is that it's a blank canvas. So we can write the script ourselves. You see, I mean, there's something you mentioned, Ambassador. You are not advocate ambassador. You are advocate. You are ambassador, not advocate ambassador. Okay, fine, I understand. Ambassador. See, my sense about Biko is that what Biko thought of the conception of BC, right, was that it would be a meta theory. You see, by meta theory, I mean it would transcend all theories of black liberation. You see, it will be a theory to end all theories. You see, so that is what he thought about it, as a transcendent theory. And the reason, I mean, this is why I say that he stands for me at the pinnacle of black intellectual thought. You know, these universities, they say, no, come and read Locke. And these guys, these British guys. There is Biko, but anyway, he's not prescribed in your text. I don't know why they're not prescribing Biko. So, and the reason BC was able, as a theory, to transcend all theories, to be a meta theory, was because it started, unlike other theories of political liberation, is because it started with the individual. You see. So in other words, it's a theory of self-liberation first, before state liberation. And that state liberation was impossible without self-liberation. So what he was trying to do is to unpack Sobukwe's status campaign. He was trying to unpack, trying to roll it out, to say this is what it means to you as an individual. And the consequence is that the BC theory of Biko is applicable everywhere. You see, it's like proper, you know, like so, and that's what I think he was trying to so for as long we don't grasp that nettle, which is at the center of the philosophy, for as long as we don't grasp it, we have an impoverished conception of freedom. You see, so that's why I think he is probably the most challenging political theorist. It's because of the meta-ness, I think, in the theory itself. And unfortunately, we do less theorizing of Biko, you know. And I understand that. I mean, the apartheid system just created boxes, you know, that, you know, this one is a communist, etc., etc. But I mean, the ideas of communism, etc., those are good ideas as well, but those are ideas of state theory. It's like let's overthrow the government, etc. But they're not ideas of self-liberation, which is what Biko was about. You know? So if we now think about that meaningfully, as here, there are many, many, many things that we should be doing, right? To self-liberate. Many, many things we should be doing to self-liberate. We should not be waiting for a liberator to come from outside. Our communities are rotting. They are falling apart, you see, because we are waiting for other people to solve the problems in our communities. You know, we are not helping to solve the problems in our communities ourselves, you see, not in an abstract way, but in a very concrete and tangible way. You see, the problems in the townships, you know, it's the absence of BC. that actually drives those problems. I know there's poverty, etc., but those are structural problems. But because BC transcends the structure itself, so that's the point I was trying to say towards the end about when I said his spirit is still here, so he's still talking to us today. He's gone, but he's not gone. It's in that sense that I was trying to say. Well, he is still here with us. But maybe we should have a further conversation about the theory itself and why it's not prescribed for you to study it in a classroom and for you to be examined in it. Don't know who are these people who are doing curriculums in universities. They are prescribing. Yeah. No, because you see, the problem is that they are prescribing these dead European men for our children. But here is an actual black philosopher who's not prescribed. I don't understand how that works. Just defeats me. So, okay, that's one. Then I want to move then from what I was trying to say about the theory itself. That's a thought to deposit. We must discuss it further again later. Then I need to talk about, there's a lot of how do we do this, how do we do this, And that's why I'll say I have a line in the paper that says, Biko's idea was not that we should think like him, but that we should think for ourselves. That I think is a very strong thing about Biko's thing. I accept that there are pitfalls with the legal system and the judiciary, that quite a lot of things must be done to fix the judiciary and get it right, etc. But I argue that there is no comparison in the levels of complicity between the apartheid legal order and the current legal order. There's just no comparison between the two. So, but the price of freedom is vigilance. We have to protect what we have and we have to build on it. So we can't say, look, these judges have done this, they shouldn't have done that, and therefore let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. So, all right, then I've got two more things I want to say about the questions that were being raised about why I say the Constitution is a book of redemption. It was intended to be like that. It was intended to be a redemptive book, because there are many, many countries in the world that have seen evil, but few actually come close to South Africa. Guys, when these white people arrived on the 6th of April, 1652, Jan van Riebeeck, the first thing, it's on a Saturday afternoon. It's windy, but it's sunny. This is Van Riebeeck, he writes this in his diaries. It's windy, it's sunny, he's arriving. They are hungry, they have no food, they have not eaten in days. Where do they get the food from? They got the food from the Khoi tribes they met. Said, okay, these are people that are hungry, let's give them a sheep to slaughter. Right, give them. And he records, he's very excited that they've now got this meat and they will have provisions for the next couple of days. This is a very powerful episode in the interaction between native people and the Europeans, because native people are very welcoming, open to strangers. They don't have any evil intent. They're just helping someone who's happened, because they've seen so many of these white people, whether from Spain or Portugal, being washed ashore, some of them victims of shipwrecks. So there's something innate. Now, what is this thing that they're doing there, right? Where these are strangers, they are hungry, we give them food. What is this thing called? Ubuntu. That's what it's called. Exactly. This is the definition of Ubuntu. Later on, 1657, Jan van Riebeeck makes another entry. He says, but I don't understand these people. They come here, they bring this cattle here, they're so close to us. If only we had a couple of guns, we could actually usurp these cattle and steal them and make them our own, which is how they then begin. like the process of stealing the cattle. So they literally steal the cattle. Thereafter they say, no, but it's not enough that we've stolen this cattle, we also want their land. But that's also not enough too. We want them to work for us, introducing slavery, in the Cape. And then later on, the others, they will say, no, we want to leave the Dutch East India Company, so-called freeburgers, want to leave. And Van Riebeeck says, no, don't leave, because if you stay, I will guarantee you 3 things. I'll guarantee you free labor, I'll guarantee you free land, and I'll guarantee you free market. So you won't even pay tax. And then they start an agricultural market in the Cape. And now I always, Chairperson, I find this very funny. People are complaining, they say, oh no, the blacks have been given the land, but look at the land now, they can't work the land. And then they say, but how did the whites do it? But it's because the blacks were working for them. But the whites are not working for the blacks, the whole thing makes no sense to me. So the point about that episode, this episode of the interface and the interaction, is that it's the definition of the South African story. This is how it started. This is how the South African story started. Now, of course, the blacks are not going to say, let's chase the whites to the sea. That's not going to happen. Right? Even when Sobukwe, there's a book that was published in 1976, something like that, I think, which contained a passage that Sobukwe's philosophy is that whites must be thrown to the sea. Now, Sobukwe sued the publisher of that book and said, I've never said this. So I've never argued that whites must go back to the sea. But what I have argued is that the whites must share the resources of this country with its own indigenous people. That's what we must be demanding. Now, unfortunately, this is a problem with South Africa. So unfortunately, whenever you raise the problem of racialized inequality, you are now the racist. It just beats me. There is an obvious problem in this country. There is too much concentration of wealth in white hands, and there is too much poverty concentrated in black communities. Now, this is an unsustainable future for this country. It has been as unsustainable as it was since even today, it's still the position. But, and now I'm coming to your point about redemption. The path for the future is a constitutional path. You may say that you have a different path that you have in mind, which is not a constitutional path. I don't know what that is. But what I know from experience is that societies that have tried to do this outside of the legal framework have ended up creating more impoverishment for poor people. Right? The people that tend to benefit from a state without rules are the people with guns and money. And the people with no guns and the people with no money are always the losers. So you say, do you mean this for real? Yes, when I speak publicly, it's because I mean those things for real. Yes, otherwise, I'm just a politician. If I just speak and then I don't mean, I'm not a politician. Politicians can do this, but I can't afford, because my job depends on reputation and credibility. So if what you say is true, I wrote it down and I read it out, which is what I do. I write things down, I read them out. But the reason it happened like that is because I meant it. And that's why I am able to defend my position. Yes. Now, okay, the last point now. Okay, I'm sorry, Chairperson. The last point. Look, the thing about Zondo, Judge Zondo.
There's 1 minute remaining.
Yes, all right. I'll take 30 seconds. You were saying, is Judge Zondo going to continue? Is he in the... Yes, I mean, he won't continue. He's not the chairperson anymore. The commission has finished. But there are still people that are in court that are contesting the outcomes and the findings. I am involved in 3 of the cases. I'm representing the former Chief Justice. Those cases are continuing. We are defending them. We think there's no merit in the cases. One of the cases you know about, so-called recuser, I don't want you. You must recuse yourself. We were friends. No, we were not friends. So, so you know the case is out there. I can't tell you the intricacies. I'm bound by attorney-client privilege, but he is able to sign affidavits and whatever. So, because the way the system works is that the chairperson of the commission remains designated as chairperson even after the commission has ended. Otherwise, there would be no one responsible to defend. Although I saw the Minister of Justice is refusing to give the NPA access to the records. I'm like, how are they going to prosecute all of these crooks? I don't understand. Right. Anyway, no. Thank you.
Ngozi. Can you please give the advocate a round of applause? Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you very much. Fortunately, there's one question, so I don't have to take a lot of time. But it is quite a difficult question as to, it's always easy to criticize, to find fault with things. But when you're asked a direct question about how do we fix them, that really becomes the challenge, isn't it? Now, it's worse when a diplomat is asked this question. According to the advocate, politicians can, he didn't quite say lie, but at least he spoke about advocates that they mean what they say. I'm not sure what diplomats do in the environment, but I have to stay close to being a diplomat, just in case I've got another post coming. And that would be, for me, in response to the question, that perhaps there are simple things that we really ought to be looking at. Take Section 27. I think it always strikes me as strange that a black child falls into a latrine. It becomes Section 27 that brings up the action. And you look at Section 27, you realize that it's ostensibly not black. It is the lack of provision of health facilities to a majority of black environs. Indeed, black consciousness speaks about the ability to read and understand your own environment and seek a fundamental change to revolutionize those circumstances so that your dignity can be restored, so that your sense of who you are, identity, can be celebrated as both an individual as well as a collective in that particular community. But why is it that when these bad and worse things happen to us, there is no response to us as either organizations, as either individuals? Is it because we don't have the money? Is it because maybe it takes a lot of money for the Suzman Foundation to be able to do something about the fact that a child has fallen into a latrine? I'm a little worried that some new tendency has also begun amongst us, which is that our agenda is drawn by, our political agenda that is authored by the only governance or the governance that is before us. There's a preoccupation about the ANC has done this, there's corruption, there's this, there's the other. But when last did you hear that what is black consciousness? President, please don't get me wrong. I did already apologize that I don't want to be, what is the word, when you are thrown away? I don't want to be thrown away. And I'm not attacking Azapo per se, but I think I agree with Advocate that you must be able to go and teach black consciousness within schools. And should it be limited to the agreement that the schools may agree to the curriculum? If we go that route, we probably are going to wait forever or for a long time or ad infinitum. Surely some pressure can be built to make sure that black consciousness is a philosophy, Pan-Africanism is a philosophy, is part of our curriculum and DNA as a people. Because when we have those tools, we can then respond when we are challenged with incidences of racism and all other difficulties. A man or a woman that is not empowered upstairs finds it difficult to be able to deal with racism when he has to confront it head on. And black consciousness is there to empower that man or woman to be able to do something. My dear sister, I can't answer the question item for item and all sorts, but I think we can all think what is to be done. The last thing I should say, I've been reading with interest that in universities you find elections of SRCs, and the outcomes are rather curious to look at. Perhaps something should also be done. I had hoped that I would see as something as part of the top organizations. Surely when Botiro, Bobiko and so forth were saying it is time for us to organize, it started in schools and universities. And there exists some opportunity to be able to do something significant so that black consciousness is ingrained in people's minds and becomes a way of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being patient with us. I think, the lingering question right now is, what is our generational mission and our national mission? I mean, for example, we know what the American dream is. Republican or Democrat, neoliberalism will be the order of the day. So thank you so much to Advocate Ngcukaitobi and Ambassador Rakwena. Now I'd like to call upon the President of AZAPO, Mr. Nelson Mandela, to give us the vote of thanks. Give a round of applause, please.
Another round of applause to our able, capable Program Director, Budvuyo. In an oxymoronic sense, I don't know how he does it, that he can be so loud in a silent way. I don't know how he does it. Another one, give him, he deserves it. I've learned a lot. That was wonderful, sir. I'm telling you, that was wonderful. Let me just say this, and then I sit down. And I said it elsewhere last week, and let me just say it. There was this soldier who was captured in war, fighting for his country. And I'm saying this when I'm looking at us. The fright, the fear, the dread that we have to die for our country. And so this soldier is captured, and then he's taken to the gallows, and then before they hang him, they ask him, do you have any last thing to say? And he says, my only regret is that I have only one life to lose for my country. The only regret that I have is that I have only one life to lose for my country, and he dies thereafter. Very sad that he cannot die again and again and again and again and again for his country. That's what I thought about Biko when all of you were talking here. That I'm sure where he's lying beyond the grave, he regrets when he looks at you. What are you doing about his blood? Urinating on his blood, gliding, slipping on his blood towards greed, and greed for yourself and for yourself only, and you being the leader of the people. I'm sure he regrets that he has only one life to lose for his country. And it is right that we are here, kulungile ukubalapha, because we are here to commemorate a rebel. A rebel. We're here to commemorate a rebel. He rebelled when he was arrested in Makanda. Peter Jones was trying to say, but they were asking, who is Biko? Are you Biko? And Peter Jones is trying to say, no. And Steve Biko jumps and says, I am Steve Biko. And that leads to his death. He says, I am Steve Biko. And that leads to his death. The genesis of his martyrdom. A rebel. He rebels against fear. He rebels against racism, white supremacy. Right, you're right, Kamela. Right inside prison. We are not there. Brambu, you were not there as his comrades. He is alone in detention. He can be, nobody knows where he is. And he rebels. And then he traps a police major right inside detention. Claps. Rebels against fear. He rebels against death. And he dismisses death as a highly irrational thing. Of course, yes. We've got to say these things. And this afternoon, when Comrade Mbulelo and Comrade Ngcukaitobi, this afternoon, when we look at what is happening, when we are running away from our own children, we are being killed by our own children, we are no longer running away from racists, colonialists, and them, but from our own children. They are demanding protection fee. What are we doing? No, the police. No. What police? What police? Stand up, rise. Stand up, rise. Stand up in your communities. Come together. Come together. The totality of the involvement of black people. Stand up and deal with your own children. Forget about the state. You will never find the state anywhere. You are the state. Forget about God for the moment. You are God. Because you were created in the image of God. Oh, Masamben. All right. Masamben. Nice can't go. All right. Oh, let us do this. Jola. You don't know this and you have never been told and you will never understand it. You are the embodiment of our pride as black people. We're proud of you. Siyazinga ngawe mfokabawo. Xa uphuma unyandela unyantsuba usenjinjiya ingcangcazela uSirayeli. Angcangcazela uBiden, angcangcazela iAmerica, siyazinga ngawe. We're proud of you. Joli Ngombo. Wena awuloxeleka lonyuluka uyayaba inkomo, uyayijola inkomo, uyayaba. Thank you, sir. Thank you, comrade. Thank you so much. Ngojijola. Hayi wethu mandizinyanzele nam ndiyazalwa ngamampondomise. Mandizinyanzele. Hey, Kamela, it was nice for us here to be able, just to push the foot towards the grave and towards Ginsberg and wake up Steve Biko, and then not even any noisily, and then, comes and can you come, Steve, can you come, Steve? And then we find Steve Biko in your image and in your embodiment in our midst. It was great to have Steve Biko in you being part of us. Enkosi Kamela. And the family, of course. Ngeke sumshiye umama uMandlovu. Umama wami ke lo wana uthanda uzimenza umama wakho. Yes. And when I do that, it was lovely. Nobe suthi umntana masoze ndithi kuMandlovu sowuvile. Oh, I like what you are saying. You are saying to us, ningancami. Because you understand, if we're going to want to sprint, we are going to tire somewhere along the way. You are dismissing militancy in favor of radicalism because those are not two and the same thing. You understand that? And that's a protracted warfare. But you also say, don't give up. Never give up. That's what you are saying. Oh, you are gifted. Anga, hello. Thank you, Bantwana Bam Enkosi. And I move and I'm saying, what is my leader of all the people? The SRC president is still in our midst. Please, if you are here, please rise. You're our leader. Lead us. And thank you very much. He's outside, and there is our leader. He's outside only to be inside. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. And when we do that, Dongadala, I will never say anything. Dongadala. Thank you so much. This is our poets. And I see the MMC here. We are honored, sir. We are honored, sir, that you could be among us. Umawawa, Sikamana, Diabulela Mumzan. But as I do that, the diplomat, thank you very much. Just the way you are able to say things, and then that velvety voice, You leave all the silky things to Tembeka, and then you take the velvet. Thank you, sir. Please give him a big hand. And I'm now going to our partners as a Zapo. Now, Relima Azapo, and let's take this moment. You are a university like no other. And that is why you are quick to call yourself, and you did it right, that was correct, Nelson Mandela. You are a university like no other. And we are proud to be your partners. You are creators, enablers. You make this thing happen. And as a Zapo, Tina as a Zapo, we've got nothing to do with this. This is yours. And then See Azapo, please give them a hand. The Nelson Mandela University, a university like no other. The acting VC Gqeberha yakwaJack jona indlela ehleli ngayo ngesithozela enkosi mama uMwenga. And lastly and not least, Steve Biko says to you, you are your own liberators. Utsho kuni ukuba ngaba kukhona apha umuntu onemikondo, phakamani ke sukumani ukuba banemiqondo, sukumani ngalomzuzu nonke ukuba ngaba nemikondo, ze kuthi ukuba ngaba ninenyawo zeliqhenze, ze kuthi ukuba ngaba ninezandla zeniqhwabe, ukuba ninemilomo zenivume niqule nombele, nisithi kuni khani iziqhwabeleni kaniphakameni bantwana bakabiko. Sukumani man, sukumani niziqhwabele ngokwenu. This was lovely. We're coming here next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President. Yeah, that brings us to the end of our lecture. May I kindly ask our speaker, respondent, President Gqeberha, Mr. Steve Biko, as well as the acting Vice Chancellor and the DVC, to please come to the front. There's some tokens of appreciation from CANRAD and the Nelson Mandela University. But for the rest of everybody else, Amandla! Amandla! Thank you very much. So we're going to be addressing the national question outside. Please feel free and network with one another. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.